All right, so we can see that the will probably isn't going to help in this life insurance case. So what is another idea? Let's say Michael gets a trust. Now, when I say that word, a lot of people get really squirrely. They think, oh, I don't need that. I don't need to know about that. That's not for me. That's for super wealthy people. That's for business owners. That's for tax sheltering. That's for those very wealthy people that give to PBS and their name pops up on the TV. There's a lot of misconceptions about what a trust is and what it does. So I'm going to walk you through so you can kind of have a basic idea of how a trust can function for a variety of different demographics. The first kind of trust I'm going to talk about is called a testamentary trust. A testamentary trust is a trust that is created within a will. So let's say the will is the governing document for someone's assets. They say, here's my family information, spouse's name, kids' names, dates of birth. Here's my personal representative, used to be called executor, if that sounds more familiar. So the personal representative is named in the will. That's who's in charge of administering the estate, distributing assets, going to the bank, that kind of thing. And then you can say who gets what and under what structure. Now, in a will, when you're saying who gets what and under what structure, you can have trust language in there where you could say if a beneficiary happens to be under the age of 25 or 30 or whatever you think is appropriate, then this testamentary trust pops open, and that's holding the assets until that beneficiary then turns that age that you've selected, then they get their share. Now, the thing to note about this is because a testamentary trust is created within a will, that's going to go through the probate court. A lot of people don't realize this. They'll call our office and say, oh, I want to do my will so I can avoid probate. And we have to tell them that's really not how it works. A will is going to put you into probate. Now, why is this important? Probate's a court system, first of all. So, there's a judge involved and there's a court case and a case number and, some deadlines and some procedural things that have to happen. But also, a probate case is a public thing. Any one of us could go down to the probate court and search the probate records, look at people's wills, see who their family is, who's in charge of their estate, when people are inheriting assets and under what structure and all of that. Because anything filed in probate becomes a public record. That would include a will. So if you had a will that has testamentary trust language in it, if something happened to you, your personal representative takes the will to the probate court, files it there, is appointed by the judge as the personal representative, then they have authority to deal with the assets. But once that will is filed in the court case, it's a public record. So now anyone could see what's in your will. So the alternative to the testamentary trust is what we call a living trust. It's essentially a will substitute. It can do very similar, if not exactly the same things as a will. In the living trust, you would say, here's my family information, spouse, kids, names, and dates of birth. Who's in charge of the trust? Who's the trustee? It's called a personal representative in a will. It's called a trustee in a trust. How are things being distributed? Under what structure? What ages are appropriate for beneficiaries to get money? So it can do the same thing as a will, but the main difference is that a living trust does not go through probate. So this is kind of a probate avoidance tool that a lot of people use because they don't want their family and loved ones to end up in that public court system. The type of trust that we're going to talk about is what we call a revocable living trust. If you Google that, you will literally get a million hits. It's a very, very common estate planning tool. When you do a revocable living trust, there are three parties involved. First, there's the grantor. The grantor, or also called a settlor, that is the person who has created the trust. Then we have the trustee. The trustee is the person who is in charge of managing the assets that are in the trust. And the third is the beneficiary. The beneficiary is the person or entity who is benefiting from whatever assets the trust is holding. For the grantor, that is always going to be you. You have created the trust, you can't change the grantor. And you're in charge of this trust. The root word of revocable is revoke, which means you can change it anytime. You can amend it, you can change the trustees, you can change the beneficiaries, you can add charitable gifts, you can revoke it in its entirety if you would like to. You're totally in charge of that trust and the terms of it. The trustee is you while you're living, and then you name a successor trustee behind you. So if you have a joint trust, a lot of couples will choose to do a joint trust. If one of the spouses passes away, then the surviving spouse is the trustee. And then when the surviving spouse passes away, that's when the successor trustee is going to step in. And that person's in charge of administering the assets that are in the trust. So you could choose whoever you want as a successor trustee. You could choose a parent, you could choose a sibling, a cousin, a friend, your next door neighbor, a financial advisor or attorney, whoever you think would do a great job managing your assets for the benefit of your beneficiaries. That's an appropriate choice. Now, the beneficiary is you while you're living, and then some common beneficiaries after passing would be your kids, your grandkids. Maybe you want to add a charitable gift in there. So you can see up here, you are the trustee and the beneficiary while you're living. That means you are managing your assets for your own benefit. If you think of it logistically, that's what we already do. Nothing is going to change on a day-to-day level. We already manage our own assets for our own benefit. The only thing that's changing is that you're managing the assets from within the trust as the trustee, as opposed to in your own personal name. Now, conceptually, I want you to think of a trust like a backpack. You've probably been wondering what all of this crazy stuff is up here. Now, here is our trust. It's an entity that you're creating separate from yourself that's going to hold your stuff, and it's going to avoid probate for any assets that are in the backpack. Now, let's say we create this trust and we still have all of our stuff out here outside the trust in our own personal name or however we have it currently titled. This is not going to do anything. This is empty. It has nothing to control or govern. So after we create our trust, there is a second piece of the process called trust funding. That's moving assets into the trust. How do we fund our trust? There's a few different ways we can do that. The first is we can change title or ownership of an asset to the trust. So one example would be your house. Here we have our lovely little house. Probably right now you have title to your house or real estate in your own personal name. So what we would do is we would change the title of the house to be in the name of the trust. Now, if you own a piece of real estate, you probably recall when you purchase it that you go to the title company, you sign a lot of documents. Part of them relate to the real estate, part of them relate to the loan. Now, this you can see right here, Social Security number. This trust is identified by your Social Security number. So moving title into this trust is not going to trigger anything in your mortgage, because I want you to think of this as you. You are the trust is you. So although the trust holds the title to the real estate, you are still personally guaranteeing the loan. So the lender does not care about a transfer of title into a revocable living trust. The other way we can fund a trust is through a beneficiary designation. Now this bag, this is our money. This would be like your bank accounts, checking, savings, money markets, CDs, anything like that. Or investment accounts, like a brokerage account, a mutual fund, anything that's kind of money-based. You can do either one of these. You can either change the ownership of the account to the trust, or you can add a beneficiary designation to it. So for changing the title or ownership, you would want to go into your bank and say, I want my account to be owned by my trust. Or you would go to your advisor and say, I want my investment account to be owned by my trust. Now remember, you're the trustee, so you're still in charge of that money. You can still move money around, you can still write checks, if people still write checks. You're in charge of the money as the trustee. The other thing you can do if you don't want to change the title or ownership is add a beneficiary to it. So you would go into your bank and tell the banker, I would like to add a pay on death or a POD beneficiary to the bank account. So you're still the owner, or whoever's the owner with you. That remains the same during lifetime, and then it's paid on death into the trust through that beneficiary designation. For an investment account, it functions similarly, but it's called something different. It's called a transfer on death or a TOD beneficiary. So you would just go to your advisor or investment company and say, I want the ownership to remain the same. I want to be the owner, but I want to add a TOD to the trust. So you own it during your lifetime, it's transferred on death into the trust. So for our money-based accounts, banks and investments, we can use either one of those mechanisms to fund the trust. So that's how we get our money in here. Now we have our retirement accounts. These sunglasses are going to represent retirement. What do people do when they retire? I don't know, they move to Florida, they go on vacation. So sunglasses mean retirement account. For these, you're going to use a beneficiary designation to the trust. Now, depending on how a trust is structured and how we want things to play out, either a spouse would be primary beneficiary generally, and then the trust would be the contingent beneficiary. Or you could name the trust as the primary, but there are some issues with that we would want to talk through, make sure that we know what we're doing before we do that. So either way, whether the trust is the primary or the contingent beneficiary on retirement accounts, that's how we're funding this asset into the trust. All right, now we're going to talk about life insurance. So here's our life insurance. If I can get this umbrella open, it's kind of representing, protecting your family. So this is life insurance. It is similar to the retirement accounts. So you're going to either name the trust as the primary or the contingent beneficiary on life insurance. Now, this is the way we avoid having life insurance proceeds going directly to a minor. So instead of having a minor named personally as a beneficiary on life insurance, we're going to name the trust. So I'll tell you, nearly 100% of my clients that walk into my office that have minor children that are married, they have their spouse as the primary beneficiary, and they have their children as the contingent beneficiaries. This is very dangerous because if something happens to both parents, you've now directed a financial institution to pay money to a minor, which we've already learned that they can't do that. So this is the alternative. Spouse could be first, and then the trust could be the contingent so that it's going in here for the benefit of the minor children, not to them personally. All right, now we have vehicles. So Colorado has a pretty cool form that's a title transfer upon death form where you can say, I own this vehicle during my lifetime, but the title to that vehicle is transferred to the trust upon passing. So that's how we can get vehicles into the trust. We also have our personal property. So personal property is your stuff, your jewelry, your furniture, clothing, anything like that. So let's say we have these lovely jewels here. All right, we can say that we're going to assign our interest in any personal property to the trust. Now this is a general blanket assignment. I tell my clients, don't call me every time you get a new pair of shoes. There's no list of stuff. It just says anything I own at my passing that's tangible property is assigned into the trust. So that's how we can get our jewels and other items into the trust. Then you might have some special things like collectibles, family heirlooms, footballs signed by our friend Mark Schlereth. So for this, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can either give it specifically to an individual through what's called a memorandum, which is a separate document from the trust. So the trust references the memorandum. It says anything on a memorandum goes first, and everything else is governed by that assignment. So like, let's say you wanted this to go to your brother. The memorandum lists the Mark Schlereth football to your brother. That thing happens first, and then everything else, all of our jewels and everything else is governed by that general assignment. So that's how we can get this. If your brother doesn't want the football or you don't have someone you want it to specifically go to, it could just go under that general assignment into the trust. Next, we have our fur babies. So how we handle animals is we write a pet guardian right into the trust. We say, if something happens and we have pets that are living with us, the pet guardian is so-and-so. If they can't take the animals or they won't take the animals, then our backup is so-and-so. You can also give a cash gift along with the animals. Now I tell my clients that cash is not going to the animal, it's going to the guardian for the animal. So if they need transport, to be transported somewhere, they need vet or food or other setup costs for the animal, the pet guardian would have the ability to do that. So that's how we get our fur babies into the trust, is through that guardianship designation. So now we have our fully funded trust, and your trust is a single private document that says who gets what and under what structure. So if something happens, your successor trustee can step in, pick up the backpack, and they can start managing the trust assets right away in the manner that you have indicated you want that done. They don't have to go to a court, they don't have to go to a judge, they have automatic authority, and then they have just one set of instructions in the trust document about how to manage all of the assets. So it's a pretty cohesive way to have all of your assets managed in one way by one person.